Salim, welcome to the first in a series of, I hope, quite a few conversations around the future of energy in the city of Cape Town. This is part of a virtual Energy Futures Festival, where we're hoping to share with the citizens of Cape Town the applications and opportunities around energy efficiency, alternative transport, water efficiency, and sustainable living. We're having a series of conversations with thought leaders like yourself to understand how we can build a reimagined future energy for the city of Cape Town. Salim, are you a Cape Townian?
I am.
You
Actually, I was
are.
born in Cape Town.
We're in Cape Town.
I was born in Rylands, actually.
In
Yeah.
Rylands. The sisters go
The
well.
Cook sisters are very good.
Okay. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself,
Sure,
your history, and how you got into climate change
sure.
and the new energy revolution.
Okay. Actually, my training is in molecular biology, and I joined an organization called the Land and Agriculture Policy Center just before the ANC got into power. And in fact, the LAPC was a think tank for the ANC around land reform and that. And I decided very quickly that laboratory is not for me, and I'm more interested in social and development issues. And that's how I started my career. And then from there, I was asked to run a country office for the World Conservation Union. And then I ran that for 8 years. Then I quickly realized the energy sector is a growing sector and it's very exciting. But when we started, I actually worked for a company called Loreco Energy and it was very new. And given the energy sector is very highly regulated, and we will come to this topic today, we try to make some investments in the sort of independent power producer sector, enterprises, but that didn't really work out. And then I left because the company had to shut down. I left to Stellenbosch University, and it just happened. Then the Center for Sustainable Energy, Renewable Energy, started with Vickers as director and I as deputy director. And I also put together a course on renewable energy and finance. And that's how I got into this area, and it's been really wonderful experience. And I'm starting a new foundation now. It's called the African Climate Foundation, and we will work across Africa. We have a hub in South Africa. Energy transitions is going to be one of our big areas of focus. It actually is already. In fact, before the foundation started, there was some work is ongoing that was funded by the key funder that's funding the African Climate Foundation, or the ACF. And we are working very closely around issues of energy transition on a bigger scale to look at moving beyond the integrated resource plan currently. So this particular job is really exciting, and working across Africa is phenomenal. I'm learning a lot. Yeah.
The city of Cape Town has set itself a target, ambition
Sure.
of being carbon neutral by 2050.
Right.
And a great part of that is transitioning to renewables.
Right.
And you spoke about the energy transition that your foundation
Sure.
is working in. With the disparity in our
Right.
communities, in the economic downturn, the context that we're in now, COVID, for example.
Right.
How do you see the energy transition moving in South Africa when you have so many challenges?
Sure.
This is something that we're struggling with at the city.
Yes. Energy security is crucial. So I would say that the way to deal with this issue is to try to look at the co-benefit as climate change as a co-benefit of a broader energy security issue. And we have a high dependence on coal in South Africa, which is a risk in my view. And if you took a pure energy security point of view, you can marry the climate agenda with the energy security agenda. And I would say that the issue for the city is about diversification of its energy security. And you've got to build on that, because there's a big economic case to be made around that. Lack of energy will lead to blackouts, will lead to shutting down of small businesses. Uh, it also will reduce the opportunities, particularly in high dense areas, townships, and so on, for people to be able to build small enterprises, etc. So I would say look at it from an energy security point of view and build your climate agenda on top of that. It's very fundamental. And those two issues, in my view, diversifying the energy base from a security point of view, because we can't actually drop the climate lens. We have to build it in the energy security model. We need to try to get that fast on track, and there are good grounds for South Africa to be able to move in that direction, particularly at the city level, very decentralized, because our power is too concentrated at a very central level in one utility. In fact, to the extent that the power the majority of our power plants are north of the country, highly dependent on coal. Anybody who looks at it from a security point of view will know that's a high risk situation. So that has to be broken down in a more decentralized way to reduce the risk to the entire energy sector. So there are potential jobs in direct energy installation, but I think most of the jobs will come from better energy security, because you have we have to take into consideration the quality of the energy, the affordability of it, and the availability of the energy for people to be able to use in a sustainable and stable way over time without disruptions and reduction of quality and also cost. So that's the economic spin-offs.
So when you talk decentralization, it sounds like a municipality should have a big role to play. Within our current legislation, how do we make that happen?
So that's so let me go historically. So we know that for the fact that metros played a big role in energy. You just have to look at Athlone Power Station. You look at Orlando in Soweto. So there was a decentralized model many years ago. We've reverted back to a centralized model. I do think that the centralized model will require legislative and policy reform in order to allow for diversification of the ability of different entities, state entities, which includes the city, to play a bigger role in that space. Purely, if you took just a purely energy security point of view, that's a good thing. And also, if you talked about sustainability measures, a city should have the mandate to be able to do whatever their constituencies want them to do, which is basically manage the relationship between high fossil dependence with cleaner energy sources, and to begin to start to build that mix with over time reducing the fossil dependence. I don't think we can completely get off fossil dependence, but we have to, given your timeline of 2050, as renewables costs come down, we must be able to. I think Cape Town is in the invidious position. We do have nuclear, which, whatever one wants to view it, it is there. But I think the city has a huge availability of solar and wind resources. So it should definitely play a bigger role in this, just from a point of view of both security, resource, and the need. The city should play a much bigger role than it is currently doing.
And the city would like to. We are starting to develop our own solar assets.
Right.
We were hoping to purchase directly from independent power producers on a large scale and also on a small scale. And then we've developed a wheeling framework to try and facilitate third-party access to the grid, so that those that can put on,
Right.
say, solar panels on the roofs can transfer that green electricity
Right.
to those that need it. You mentioned now householders and
Right.
the need for choice and them wanting to put solar panels on
Right.
their roofs. And the city is in or any municipality
Mhm.
is in a difficult position when it comes to wanting to promote renewables and
Right.
decentralization and creating the opportunities for their residents to become resilient and
Right.
put up their own systems and maintaining the grid for those that
Right.
and providing access to electricity for those that cannot. Those sort of trade-offs. What's your suggestion of how the city could work with those
So
dichotomies?
I think those trade-offs will always be there. It can't be resolved just by the city. It
Mm,
actually requires a much more bigger dialogue in combination with other like-minded cities. So I
mm-hmm,
think that's something you have to think about as a coalition of cities working together to reform the system that if you were to, for example, allow households to generate, is there levies that you can generate for the benefit because they don't have to buy storage,
mm,
okay? So, but they can pay a little premium in which the city is able to collect these levies and be able to then do other things with it, like upgrade the grid, maybe put in more uh, centralized storage capacity in which the community of autonomous generators can benefit from, and the third part is to deal with the inequality of access
mm,
to
mm,
energy and to be able to do that. I think the difficulty would be that there's a bit of a constraint from a legal, legislative, and financial point of view of what the city can do independently. The question is, how can the city form coalitions with other like-minded metros and put on the table with National Treasury and other parties these set of reforms? We have to push hard because I think that vision is required,
mm,
that coordinated mechanism of cities having to work together is probably the timing for it is now. And I think a lot more work has to be done in it. I think if you look at what the South African local government agency is trying to do, there seems to be appetite for it. I think the more you can in a sense, coordinate that as a consortium of cities. Some lead cities will have to take that on that role on the benefit on behalf of the rest of other uh, district
mm,
councils
mm,
and local authorities in order to be able to build momentum behind it. I haven't seen much of that happen. So I would say that that is something
mm,
I would discourage the city of Cape Town to work as an independent,
mm,
uh, 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 independent and on your own. You just saw what has happened with your legal case, and for me, these are symptoms of, uh, you know, I can understand the reason for it, but I would say that the politics of actually engaging
mm,
coalition are ripe,
mm.
and you should certainly do that, and you would have the backing of business and other sectors behind you. And this is something I think a bottoms up approach. We can't totally rely on, and this is my observation. It's not necessarily critique of the national government, but they're moving very slowly on these issues. They are also very uh, convinced that large infrastructure project is going to solve an
Mm,
immediate problem, and that's not necessarily the case. I can't tell the government what to do. They have a policy that agenda that they have to adhere to, but they have to resolve the short-term problem,
mm.
and they should get the help from the cities to do that.
So we actually have been engaging National Treasury
Right.
to assist in developing a municipal-wide renewable energy procurement program. So similar
Okay.
to the National REAP,
Right.
but for qualifying municipalities who are
Okay.
financially able to
Right.
participate. And I agree with you. The city of Cape Town would find it very difficult to go it alone.
Right. For me, working in that way helps to depoliticize the fact that
Mm,
it's one
yes.
province is led by one party, whatever.
Mm,
It's a concerted, mutually interested group of people that are starting to develop a vision. Okay, and they're trying to help the national government solve a problem. So I think Treasury has to be involved in this. There's no way that you can actually do this without the help of Treasury. And I'm really glad to hear that you are moving on this. And obviously, if you need help from the foundation,
Thank you.
we definitely look into it
Thank
with
you.
you.
Almost a decade ago, you said that talking about climate change is like talking about what would happen if aliens landed on Earth. Has your opinion changed? And what messages should the city be carrying? And what are who should we be taking those messages to?
Yeah, so if I can go back to something I said many
Yes.
years ago, I don't even remember when, but the metaphor of the aliens was to describe a situation in which if you did tell people there were aliens today, they wouldn't believe you because nobody really believes there's aliens. And so it was about the challenge we have as practitioners in this field to to manifest climate as a real issue.
Yes.
And how does one take it from what is seen as abstract,
Yeah.
maybe something happening with hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico, but got nothing to do with us? That's the challenge I think we have. And the complexity of some climate issues is that often climate can exacerbate a prevalent problem. So, for example, I can take you, for example, through issues in the Sahel, for example. There's a lot of concern about conflict between pastoralists and agriculturalists because the availability of land for pastoralists is on the decline. Now, the issue is it a climate change problem or is it a management issue? And is it about the lack of interstate cooperation? So we have to be careful, how we come into this issue. And I'm just talking from an academic, intellectual point of view. When the climate variability is an added, complication. When the underlying issues are around maybe land tenure, acceptable resource distribution, rights over pastoralists versus agriculturalists or sedentary agriculturalists. And then you've got maybe the right crops are not grown in the area, for example. And then you've got climate variability adding to weight of risk. So the climate problem can't be solved often just with dealing with the climate risk, but you have to, or the climate risk is intertwined with other problems you've got to solve. So that's just one issue that I think along the African continent, some of these issues. On the local level, I think the challenge we have is why should we get off fossil fuels, for example, when petrol prices are low? What does it mean for people? And why should Africans, for example, be straddled with development constraints when it's actually we're inheriting a problem from somewhere else, maybe from Europe, North America, maybe China. So these are really important political issues. Doesn't mean we mustn't do anything about climate change, or we mustn't understand the local basis for it. We got to try to figure out ways of communicating climate issues, not from a point of alarmist point of view, but more from a perspective of being able to concretize the risk in daily life. Yeah.
Talking about that, what we've also struggled with is how to shift the conversation from climate science to public decision making
Right.
and the new economy
Right.
and what is right for that
Right.
trajectory.
So that's precisely why. So the decision lab idea was to improve the knowledge of science, but to be able to turn that science into good decision making. We don't talk about rational. We talk about good judgment based on wisdom, and that wisdom comes from understanding the implications on people, on their lives, and it's not about reason, because you can have good reason but you don't make wise decisions. You have to distinguish between the two. By the way, there's a lot of work on that also. Some good scholars working on that, and then being able to turn the policy into good practice. And trying to work that in a very complex situations where it's a trade-off between bread and butter issues versus higher goals. So these two have to come together in some way or the other.
So do you think there's any solutions in the near future? Because it sounds like it's quite complex and we need to.
No, I think the complexity doesn't mean that there's no solutions.
Mhm.
We just have to be quite innovative and creative about it. So the one area that I think most people will identify with is actually pollution
Yeah.
and dealing with pollution problems in the inner city and so on.
Mm,
And
mm,
there you can start working on congestion charges,
mm,
reducing the amount of traffic into.
mm,
You can also look at household pollution issues, you know. So that's how you bring a broader group of people that may not grasp the concrete part of climate change to begin to appreciate it over time.
mm, mm. So our ambition of being carbon neutral as well as close to carbon neutral
Uh-huh.
as we can by 2050, which is 30
Right.
years from now. Do you think it is doable from your perspective?
I think it's more doable in the city of Cape Town for the very reason that I mentioned that if you can reduce your dependence on coal sources,
Mm,
then you can become a lot more carbon neutral.
mm,
If you can diversify, localize the energy mix, effectively localize it, generate it here, and reduce also the dependency on fossil-based liquid fuels to drive the engine of mobility, for example.
mm,
Of course, energy efficiency is another area. So I think Cape Town has a certain kind of endowments that it needs to exploit that will enable it to get faster to carbon neutrality than waiting till 2050, which I think is doable. That's just my view. I just think that you're in a kind of envious position to do that.
We also think we have certain advantages. We've
Right,
started quite a while ago in exploring these
right,
things, but we feel also that we have one arm tied behind our backs
right,
because of our carbon intensive
right,
grid that we
right.
have, and we are locked into a national
That's right.
energy
That's
landscape
right.
that makes our ability to make our own
Right.
decisions quite difficult. And you've been working with a number of
Uh-huh.
stakeholders who influence these sort of
Right.
decisions. It would be interesting to get your perspective on how we can try and improve that area while still acknowledging that we're part of a national picture.
So it comes to the earlier point I made about that you can't. So dealing with 2050 is theoretically possible if you can get off the carbon, national carbon. Okay. But to do that, you actually need to change and reform the national status quo, which is a lot more difficult to do. I wouldn't go the legal route. I would go more the route of coalition and persuasion
Yes,
initially,
yes,
and then try to build the institutional mechanisms to be able
yes,
to drive that more solidly.
yes. In your TED talk in September of
Yes, yes,
2012, yes, you spoke about the importance of adaptation under climate change
right.
scenarios and the changing dynamics of fossil fuel dependence. How do we emphasize this given the current state that our world is in?
Right. So I would look at it from two perspectives. The one is how does the city adapt to climate change? So, for example, you know, your coastal city, the risks are high of sea level rise. And I know you've done a lot of vulnerability maps and
Yes,
so on. You actually
yes.
have reinforced certain segments. I know you can't do Milnerton. I heard that's a bit difficult. But I think those are really exemplary kind of interventions. So that's a broader protection of your uh, the constituency, your citizens, your business sector, and your infrastructure. And that's very important. Your network infrastructure is very important for the city to be able to function. You don't want that shut down, otherwise you'll have serious problems. And that for me, that's the high level, macro level adaptation. So it's making your city more resilient to shifts in climate change, whether it's slow shifts or dramatic shifts. And big focus should be on network infrastructure and functionality of it. We've seen that if we didn't have digitization, none of us would be able to do our work. So that network infrastructure in the COVID-19 has been fundamental for it has been rather exclusive in a sense that only people who had desk work and had access to internet can operate in a situation like that. But you have to broaden that so that issue of network infrastructure and functionality of different segments of society has to be looked at more closely, and how one distributes that. The other part is around impacts on livelihoods, particularly in the agricultural sector. There's a lot of knowledge and understanding, and it seems like in the Western Cape, with the cover farming and all those kinds of things, the agricultural sector, big agribusiness, is very much on top of the risk. I know that they talk to a lot of analysts, people who are working in understanding weather patterns, who then are able to take this and diagnosis and figure out what it means for insurance, what it means for capital investments in big businesses. Being agribusinesses are able to do that, but it's more small scale farmers that we have to work a lot more and try to protect these important segments of the Western Cape economy, because they're very export orientated, and also the livelihoods and the capacity of small farmers to be able to deal with that. There might be other sectors, but I think those two are the main ones. And the third one is, of course, again, not just energy, but water is fundamental to the operations of the city's economy. There you have to be a lot more resilient, and you've got to figure out the mix between behavioral change versus hard infrastructure, and how you actually manage that. And I would say it's a combination of both. The supply and demand side has to be.
Thank you, Saliem. I think we've certainly learnt a lot from you.
Well, I've learned from you also about what's going on in the city,
so
that's excellent. Yeah.
Yes, it would be great to be able to cooperate very soon in the future.
We basically set up to do that, so we should take advantage of it.
Very much like you to be part of this journey of recreating the energy landscape for the city.
I would welcome that.
Thank you. So
thank
you very
much.
Yeah,
thanks very much.
Okay.